have 1 in 8 Californians and 1 in 5 children who are food insecure. So California itself throws away more than 6 million tons of food waste every year. How food waste affects our environment. I think we all know this, that landfill is responsible for 21% of state methane emissions. Landfills are a third of the largest producer of methane. And we know that methane is 72 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And because of that, you see longer droughts, right? We experience it. Matter of fact, Gavin Newsom just made it an emergency for Sonoma and Mendocino area to not waste water, because we're experiencing it right now in those certain areas. And warmer temperatures, not just in United States, but also in across the globe. Like when in 1964 in Malaysia, you experience about a good, so many days of 90 degrees weather. Now it's tripled. So if you were in Malaysia right now, you will have more over 90-degree weather in over 172 days instead of the normal, so many days of heat. So we're seeing that throughout the globe. We're seeing that in United States. We're seeing it in California, and we're experiencing, like, the wildfires is a good example of it. And then you see bigger storms, right? I mean, we see it across the United States, bigger storms that they're having. And then coastal erosion. I think here, we saw how part of Highway 1 collapse. You're seeing a lot due to rising sea levels. So these are just some of the impacts. While food is wasted, food insecurity is surging. In 2018, 4.3 million Californians didn't have enough food. By May 2020, numbers had doubled. 9.2 million Californians who didn't know where their next meal would come from, especially during this COVID-19 economic crisis. So once again, the numbers, 1 in 5 children go hungry, and every 2.5 tons of food rescued is equivalent to 1 car off the road. The problem is, can you tell who's food insecure? Who is food insecure, right? What we know about food insecurities is that it's not, if you have to define it, it's basically somebody not knowing where their next meal is coming from. And these are the assumptions we always make, that poor people are food insecure, when we realize that, based on studies, not all poor people are food insecure, and that all food insecure people are not poor. I think that's something that we have to get in our heads. 70% of the poor families are food secured because they have food assistance programs, they have survival skills that other groups do not. Poverty does not equal to food insecurities. Approximately 15% of non-poor households are food insecure. And I think that's the big question. How do you reach these people, right? Our system is such that you literally have to cross the threshold to being what you consider needy in order to receive any assistance. So because of that, 15% of non-poor households are food insecure. So the solution of food insecurity is very different than addressing poverty. Even if you eliminate poverty tomorrow, you'll still have food insecurity. So these are the perceptions that we really have to be mindful of. Wait, where are we at here? Okay, right here, next. Food waste versus feeding the needy. I think we did not. So this is what we do. What you're looking at is really a lot of food that we pick up from grocery stores. If we didn't pick up from it, if if food bank didn't pick up for it and Peninsula food runners doesn't pick up for it, then this food would have been wasted. So it's quite a bit of food. And this is what we get on an everyday basis when we do go pick up the food. What is California doing to address food waste? There are a couple legislations, bills that were passed. I think the big one is the SB 1383. The goal is to reduce methane emissions that needs to be implemented by 2022. And what does this bill mean for Peninsula food runners? The donors are divided up into 2 tiers. By 2022, the ones who are considered tier 1, which is usually the big generators, they're usually schools, hospitals, groups that have, that are using over 10,000 square feet space, companies, large venues like, big events. They are considered tier 1. And these are the groups that we are trying to target first to get them on board. Many of these groups don't necessarily have a food recovery program in place. A lot of the ones who do donate already, they do go to the food bank because food bank has the large infrastructure that can recover the food and redistribute it out. So we're really relying on food bank to lead us in that area for the big groups. Peninsula food runners model is slightly different. We have a lot of volunteers and we have a lot of cars. So because of that, even sometimes when we do get large donations, we're able to split it up and have each vehicle take it to different recipients. So in that sense, we're nimble and we're able to also assist with large donations. But when they get over so many thousand pellets, like 1,000 pounds of pellets, we usually refer them to food bank. So how are we leading in the food waste? First of all, our mission is to reduce food insecurities and food waste in both San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. We do have a San Francisco food runners here in the city. So we are 2 different nonprofit organizations. Peninsula Food Runners has a software that we use that was created based on our work here in both these counties. And it's called Chow Match technology. And so what Chow Match technology does is it really gets grassroots efforts like community volunteers to get on board to help us with recovering good edible food. So and what we do is we redistribute the food out directly. We do not store the food. So much of our food are perishables. So I know many people are familiar with the food bank. Food bank has the capacity to sort of bring back all the donations, store it in their warehouse, and then reassemble and redistribute it. We don't do that. So we're working together with ChowMatch and Peninsula Food Runners, and this is what our tool does. It addresses food insecurity, food hunger. It reduces food waste in the landfill. It reduces, greenhouse gases. It serves as a tool for donors. So donors can actually sign up with the software directly and manage their food waste. So for example, they look at the end of the day, they say, oh my gosh, we have 4 boxes of produce that we're not using. Let me schedule a food run. And then the moment they submit it, it goes directly to our volunteers. And our volunteers will then decide, can I do that food run? And then the moment one volunteer signs for it, it's not available for other volunteers. So we don't duplicate the effort and it gets picked up pretty quickly. So it really serves as a tracking donation tool for reporting, analysis, and contracts. And it also manages volunteers. So we don't have to call our volunteers. The volunteers are already in the system, they get their alerts, they decide how they want to manage their time for volunteers. And we also track their hours. So we have on the peninsula a lot of families who want to do it with their high school students, and they can go back to their own personal account and say, oh, I volunteered Peninsula Food Runners. I did so many runs, I get so many hours, and all they have to do is print it out and give it to their school. As for the donors, they get their write-offs right off the bat from the software. They go to their own personal account. They can say, okay, I donated this much food. This is the market value. It's all in their account. And I'll explain to you why it's important to have all these kind of tools. It's because for us, it's always been about being efficient, right? A lot of food waste comes from inefficiency. And for us, it was important to have the software to do all that so that we didn't have to have too much manpower to manage the whole system. And so strategic targeting is the other thing that's really important for us. We look at the donations and we look at our clients. So there are a set of criteria that are implemented in the system. So it knows exactly these are the kind of donations will go best with this kind of recipients. For example, we will never send like farmers market produce to a shelter that doesn't have a kitchen to cook up the food. And at the same time, we won't send certain types of food to certain demographics because they don't necessarily like the food, right? It's about cultural eating. And we also think about the distance. We don't want our volunteers to be driving, picking up a donation from San Mateo and delivering it to a shelter that's down in Menlo Park, or, we want our donors to donate back into their communities so that it is close by. So we look at the distance. We also want our volunteers in the community to get involved because it's really important for them to know who their donors are and the shelters that they are in their community. We've had volunteers who have come back and say, oh, I didn't realize that this particular organization, social service organization existed. And we also encourage our volunteers to cross over and volunteer with other organizations because we feel that we're building up a community that knows each other. So consistent scheduling is very important for us because food insecurity is an everyday issue. So what we do with a lot of our recipients is we say, we have a donor for you, and this donor is always going to be donating food and it will come to you. So that's a schedule. And I think this is something that's consistent too, that Second Harvest does with their recipients, right? They always say, okay, we're going to have food distribution at this time. And then people know, people like to be able to implement the schedule. So we also want to do the same thing for our recipients. So we share the donations with as many recipients as possible because we realize that we don't want food waste even at the shelters that we bring the food to. Sometimes the donations are a lot. And if the group that you're working, your recipient group is really small, you don't want to bring them too much food because then they will turn around and also waste it. And we don't want that to happen. So we're very strategic who we bring our food to and their needs. So this is how we are leading the way with 1383. We're implementing a commitment contract. Basically, it's already existed in 2019. But with the new 2020 goals for the city and counties, they are asking any food recovery group to ask for a commitment contract with the donors. Basically, all this means is we go to the donor and say, please be committed to this food recovery program. Make sure that you go through everything that you have on site. And if it's still edible and still good, please consider saving it and making sure that you donate it out. So the contract is already in place. We try to do educational programs for donors. There's a whole educational component that goes in place when a new donor comes to us. They want to understand what it is they can donate, how it is they should donate, when can they donate. Sometimes we have donors that say, well, can you pick up the food at 8 o'clock at night, for example? Well, the problem with that issue is that shelters are closed down and many of the social service organizations work within the business hours. So we want them to be very aware that, the donations after business hours is difficult. So we try to make sure that the donors understand the certain expectations, and that they're aware that we have to work within the confines of the business schedule, also for nonprofit organizations and social service organizations. And then once again, we are targeting many of the tier one, the very, very large venues. We already are picking up from many grocery stores and schools. We do work with a couple of the Kaisers. We're already working with several of the school districts. Like for example, Fremont High School District has 5 kitchens. We're already picking up from them. Santa Clara has about 6 kitchens. We will already picking up from them for like about 2 years now. But we need to increase more school participations. So, that's our goal. Farmers market, we have already been working with farmers market like San Mateo, Belmont, Serramonte. We just started the Sunnyvale one, because there's a lot of food to be gleaned in those venues as well. For a good example, Sunnyvale Farmers Market, we just started last week. And the first day of gleaning already gave us about 12 huge boxes of produce. So you can imagine these vendors want to give if they have the option to donate, right? They don't want to have to haul it back. And they don't want to waste their food either. I mean, they realize how much work it takes to grow all the food. So why does food waste exist? We know that food is lost in every step of the life cycle, right? From the agriculture standpoint of view, in the fields, if the food doesn't look right, it doesn't meet the standard of visual, weight, it doesn't fit in the packaging, we waste it. And then, of course, handling and storage. If you don't store it right, you don't store it in good temperature, it's the process of, food going bad happens. Storage, how do you handle it? How do you distribute it? All that contributes to it. And obviously, consumption, by the time it gets to the farmer, to the market, to the store, there's only so much timeline that food needs to be bought, right? And if it doesn't, what do you do with it? So there's a lot of waste that happens through the whole food cycle. Policies, manufacturers use by date, right? I mean, manufacturers use by date. A lot of us still think that if you see the date, you think the food is no longer good. When in actual fact, what that means, it's no longer fresh, right? They want you to consume it by a certain time. And of course, you want to consume it as soon as possible, but policies, they're making a lot of changes with policies right now. And the use by date is really the big one that is being changed. And then of course you have bureaucracy, right? You have a lot of rules and guidelines on how food should be stored, how fast you have to consume it, the temperature control, and all that adds to it. Donors, for example, many donors don't know they have a choice. For the longest time, the food recovery aspect was only done, through second harvest, right? Because the donors would say, I have so many pellets. But many companies in San Mateo and Santa Clara, when it came to prepared food, they were actually discarding the food. It just made, for them, was much easier at the end of lunchtime to just toss trays of food out, right? That's not consumed. So many of them don't know they have choices. And I think in the last 5-10 years, that has really improved. They're starting to understand that, yeah, you do have groups out there that are doing it, and they can actually Google you know, where they can donate their food, and they will find us, right? And they'll find other groups as well. There are other groups who do similar work that we do, but their models are all set up differently. So from a donor's perspective, why do they have so much? Why do they always have so much surplus? I think part of it is, you know, to meet consumer expectation, right? There's this whole thing about overbuying, overstocking. God forbid if they have an empty shelf, like you walk into Target or you walk into Trader Joe's, there's food. You never see an empty spot there. So they have to meet consumer expectations, and they also have to meet sales, right? And because of that, we have this whole visual buying, right? It's all the marketing that goes into it. It's what catches your eye, what you're familiar with, and it's the advertisement. And once again, it's the sale from the companies, right? They want to meet so much quota, they sell. And so all these options also add to the overproducing, right? And then from the consumer aspect is the behavior, right? We culturally want to be like, when we host a meal for our friends, we want to make sure we always have a lot of food. We want a variety of food. We want to make sure the food meets the standard for our guests, right? We want to be able to say, oh, I tried this new wine. We like trends, right? We never want to run out of food. My goodness, God forbid if we run out of food, right, when we have guests. And in some cultures, we want to send home food with our guests, because then they will remember us as being really, really good guests. I mean, good hosts. So consumer behavior is the other thing that contributes to food waste. Traditions. I'll give you a good example. I'm a foodie person, and during Thanksgiving, I like to try different recipes. One year I think this was when the chutney cranberry was a big thing, and you know, to go with the turkey. And I thought, oh, it's being so cool. It was a trendy thing. I was cooking up for a whole family gathering, and my father-in-law came up to me and said, where is the cranberry sauce? And I said, here it is. It's the chutney, you know, version of it. And he's like, no, where is the cranberry sauce that I'm used to, which is in the can, right? So you have this generational gap that has certain expectations of what food should go with what meals, right? In his mind, he was used to that cranberry sauce in the can to go with his turkey. So you have that generational gap of perception of food. And then, of course, we also demand choices. Made food from all over the world. We demand food all year round. We want our strawberries in the winter, even though that's really not their normal season, and that is grown. We disregard the food that's coming from other countries and the policies that affect those people who live in those countries. So you know, we get our bananas all year round, but we import them, right? And yet the people who live in those countries that grow the bananas, they can't afford it themselves, because we as a country want it and we're willing to pay for it. So even where it is grown, people who live there cannot afford the food that they grow. Bulk buying, we're notorious for this. We have Sam's Club, we have Costco, we have, you know, just name it. Everything comes bigger, right? And then the last thing that contributes to food waste is impromptu buying. You go into the grocery store and you say, I want this, I want that, right? I mean, I take Paris into the grocery store and she wants her Gilkin tea, right? Which is not even on the list. So it's like impromptu buying, lack of planning. I mean, it's just the fact that when we walk in a grocery store, we don't plan. Some of us don't plan. I mean, so because of that, yeah, sure, it increases, you know, when we get home, we realize that we can't consume it all, right? And so there's waste that happens there. 25% of the food waste that happens happens from the home setting, just to let you guys know. So, that is something that, we need to keep in mind. From the recipient perspective, right? When we bring food donations to them, or when we tell them there's food, can they go get it? Sometimes they don't have the staffing for them. Many of our recipients are on a shoestring budget, so they can't go pick up food. And the staff sometimes have to say, "Oh, do I attend to my clients or do I go and pick up the food?" So because of that, Peninsula Food Runners offers the volunteers to pick up the food and bring it to our recipients. Because we realized that distribution was one of the major issues for food waste. Additional challenges for recipients. Once again, am I bringing the right type of food for the demographic? A good example is Indian food. I mean, many of us love Indian food, but that's not necessarily true for certain demographics. Some demographics don't like Indian food. So if you bring the wrong food, right, and if you to a wrong demographic, they will naturally waste it. I mean, it's just a given. And if you bring too much food and they don't know what to do with it, or they don't have enough people who need it, they will waste it too. From the staff, they don't want to do more than they are already paid for. Many of them, they always have more work. So for the recipient, this is a challenge for them. Sometimes companies that manage the recipient group. So Peninsula Food Runners also bring it to many of the affordable housing, which houses low income clients. They have to meet a certain criteria to live in these affordable housing. So sometimes there are property and resource management companies. They don't want to deal with liability, right? They want to make sure that the food you bring to their clients is safe, and so for them, they sometimes use liability as a obstacle to why they don't want you to bring free edible food. And we that's one of the obstacles on the peninsula that we experience quite a bit of. Unless you're a big group like food bank, right? You have the reputation and you have $1 million policy, insurance policy that can guarantee that if somebody gets ill, they will take care of it. Whereas with many smaller food recovery groups like ours, we don't have that kind of resources. So for us, we need to work with people who can trust us and trust that the food that we bring to them is all in good faith and safe. Lack of infrastructure. Many of our recipient groups work in tight spaces, so they don't necessarily have the infrastructure, like they don't have fridge space, or they don't have the ability to distribute it fast enough. And then clients' needs and wants. What does that mean? Sometimes we don't think about what the client's needs and what they want. And because of that, we just bring food, right? There's a tendency to just bring all this food, and the lack of understanding contributes to more waste. So I think it's really important to take clients' needs and wants into consideration. We want our clients to eat healthy, but what if they don't want kale, right? Or that's one vegetable that they don't know how to cook, they don't like it. I mean, I think we culturally eat a certain way, right? If you provide a lot of vegetables, there are certain cultures who love a lot of vegetables, but that too, they still will say, I only like certain types of vegetables. So that's the thing that we have to take in consideration. Mass kitchen production, right? I'm hearing this a lot, especially with COVID. There are groups that make a lot of food, but the question from the recipient end that we seem to be getting is, they will call us and say, can you provide us some prepared food? And I said, but are you not getting food from, these kitchens? And they say, well, we don't like their food. I mean, it's always the same. or it's a standard food. I mean, it's not appealing, right? They don't have the taste. And I think the biggest mentality that we have with many of the recipient groups, there's a tendency to think that beggars shouldn't can't be choosers. It's actually kind of wrong and dehumanizing. And I say that because we assume that just because somebody is needy, that whatever we give them, they should be grateful. And I think that really is not the right way to go, right? Especially, sure, they will take it just because sometimes they would just take it because they don't want to show that they are ungrateful. But the question is, are they utilizing it or are they wasting it? Right. And we really want to maximize utilization because we certainly don't want to put all this effort and then have them waste the food. So um so this is our impact even with COVID happening. This is based on how much food that we have recovered and how much food we have turned around, bringing it to social service organizations and our impact in the environment. Peninsula Food Runners has about over 600 volunteers and everyone's on the software. So that makes it very easy to manage. And everybody gets the alert whenever a food run comes up. So it's pretty straightforward. You either wanted to do it and help out make the distribution happen or you don't. It's really a very flexible way of volunteering. So with COVID-19, many of the companies have shut down. And so this is some of the ways, because we're so nimble, we were able to pivot. And what I mean is that these are sometimes not, I mean, these are not normal times. And so the question is, if I have so many volunteers, how can I share my resources to as many groups who need it? Because of that, we helped out Stanford. They wanted to do a pilot to encourage families to eat healthier. So what we did was we provided our volunteers to pick up boxes of food and to deliver it to homes of families that needed food. And the whole goal was to encourage them to eat healthier and not to use the excuse that they have no access to food, right? Because some families, they would not, they don't have cars, so they have to take public transportation. And during COVID, people were very hesitant about going to take public transportation. So we helped out Stanford's with their pilot for the studies to observe food access and healthy eating. The other thing was to step in where our recipient groups needed help. We had a situation where one of the main food program manager passed away. And because of that, that particular shelter didn't have a food program manager. So how did we help? What Peninsula Food Runners did was we had volunteers step up to cook meals for them so that they could distribute meals to the homeless in the San Bruno area. We also made sure that whenever volunteers came to us, we basically said, go help out Second Harvest because we knew Second Harvest needed help with volunteers. And we also helped out another recipient group, Life Moves, who's really huge on the peninsula as well. They manage about 11 facilities and they were down a driver. So we stepped in and picked up all their food distribution. So, I mean, I think the philosophy is we are very willing to share our resources because we know that when we share our resources, we are helping every group out there, with making sure that people get access to food. And I think that's a philosophy that I've always had that I feel is important. We had a church group that was in the mountains, down in Los Gatos. And it was like an area between Campbell and Santa Cruz that needed food. There were a lot of people, a lot of farm workers who were living in that area and they weren't having access to food. And part of it was because this church happens to be in the middle point, but they didn't have refrigeration space. So when we have resources like money, we bought them that fridge so that they could store more food, so they could distribute more food. So they sent us a picture. It was very, the other thing we,
sorry, Maria, to interrupt.
yeah.
We just have a few minutes left with the workshop. So
Okay.
you can just finish it, wrap it up with what you have, but and then also like leave a little room for questions if there are any.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm actually almost done.
Okay.
The other thing we did was we fundraise. We fundraise money to help out a lot of the struggling businesses. One of our partners was this caterer, a woman, woman-run catering firm, and with the help of donations, we were able to distribute over 30,000 meals. I mean, to all the various groups. What can you do today? I know there's a lot that we went over, but what can you yourself do today? You can recycle what you do not want or need. You can host flea markets or donate to scrap. You can cut down what you throw away. If you already know there's some things you don't need, you can buy less. You can cook only the quantity you're committed to consume. You can share your bulk if it's too much. You can volunteer, which I know many of you do already. You can educate people about food recovery. You can become a speaker for us or any other food recovery groups. You can speak to many of these clubs so that you can educate people about 1383, which is actually pretty easy to do because you set out one speaking event a month. You go and slides are already provided for. You can just talk to them about how they can in turn go out and educate, restaurants and different groups about why it's so important to donate. You can help out with social media. I know you're all experts on social media. I know that for a fact. You can be very creative. I mean, there's so much TikTok stuff out there. Why not do something with food, right? It'd be kind of cool. Of course, Paris says not, but social media, I mean, we need, I mean, the social media skills is something that many nonprofit organizations lack. That's something that I think many of you can do so well for us. Environmental club, you can start targeting you like that you go and support. You can ask them, do you have a food recovery program implemented? Like when you have surplus food, would you consider donating it? I mean, you can get in touch with us, especially if you're down the peninsula. We would love to get your help. Yeah, we have a lot of work cut out for us. Yeah, these are just some of the things that we need. Obviously, these are the wish lists, and that's pretty much it. So, any questions that you have, I will take.
I personally have a question about just like what your step process is in terms of like getting grocery stores to become like a part of your system and like kind of just like
yeah the first thing I do is usually, I mean, obviously I introduce. I think getting to the right people, right? The people who make decisions. I usually will start, calling them, asking who I should speak to, who make decisions on what. I mean, I do a series of questions like, are you guys, donating your surplus, right? Especially with grocery stores. Are you working with a food recovery group? And some of them already are, because I think Food Bank does a very good job of working with the grocery stores, because that's a large amount. And so they have their produce mobile that produce or rescue program. For the ones who don't, it takes a while. I mean, you have to call, you have to figure out who the contact people are, and then you have to explain what you do, and you have to do several calls. I mean, to get them to understand what you're trying to do. You supply them information, and then you follow up. There's a lot of follow-ups with grocery stores. So, and then once they say, yes, we're interested, then we'll say, okay, let's start one department at a time. What do you have, right? And so then they figure out, okay, this is how much we have, from each department. Let's find a location that you can put all your donations in one spot. that so that when the volunteers come, they know, and your staff knows how to direct them where to go pick it up. And then of course we have certain criteria, right? For the donors, the food has to be packed correctly. It has to be easy for transportation. And they're on our system. So then we ask, do you want a regular pickup? Do you want sort of like you schedule it when you have surplus? And then once we get a good sense on a regular basis how much food it is, we will connect them up to the recipient based on what they're donating. And so what we do at Peninsula Food Runners is every day that we pick up from a grocery store, let's say Trader Joe's in off Fifth Street, for example, Monday through Friday. So every day of the week, we want those donations to go to a different organization. We don't want it to go to the same organization, because for us, it's about really spreading out, right? All this surplus food. And then for us to get like regular runners to pick up the food who has the right vehicle. So that's the whole process of how we go about doing it. And it seems to have worked very well all these years that we've done it. So
Yeah, thank you to answer the question. If anyone else doesn't have any, thank you. I think that's about it.